Well, thank you so much. I am so excited to be here and be a part of this program today. It is so exciting in the utility industry to see all the good things that are happening right now, and certainly ECOS is such a great opportunity for everybody. So today, honestly, I'm going to talk a little bit about this presentation at the end. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, maybe a little bit about our company. I chose this topic because I have a lot of interest in what is happening right now in the power industry. And it all centers around this employee in charge. So today, we're going to be talking about a number of things. And I want to key into some things as I'm going through this presentation to get you thinking more about this concept of employee in charge. So this morning, I am going to be talking about, I brought some objectives to the table. Hopefully you can see them there on your screen. But I really think that let's fundamentally deep dive into the employee in charge. Let's look at it from, everybody wants to know what standards are. So I want to look at it from a standards-based process. I want to look at it from OSHA, and I also want to look at it from consensus standards. I want to then kind of describe what are some of the duties when we talk about this person that's in charge of these types of jobs that our folks are at. What does that look like? And then we're going to be talking about training and evaluating what you're doing right now, how you're setting these people up to be successful in this world. And then at the very end of this, I want to give you hopefully some things that you can take away, some methods to help you improve your process when it comes to this employee in charge. So let's go in and kind of talk about it. Now, a lot of you have phones, and a lot of you from time to time are probably on social media. I always think about this, and you pull up LinkedIn or Facebook, you look at typically what is trending and trending in your world. Well, I'm going to just tell you right now, if I had to tell you something that is trending in the electric power industry, it is definitely going to be that employee in charge. And I'm going to talk about why I feel it's that way. There's a number of us across the United States that are in the electric power world as consultants. And I've talked to several of folks like myself. And we all agree that when you think about the person that is actually in charge of field operations that are happening, that is really some things that are happening in our world right now and some things that we have to look at. So we think about this as trending. And why is it trending? There are so many job sites that we have where folks are out in the field and they're working. And honestly, I'm going to tell you it's trending because we're finding that some of these job sites don't have actually someone in charge. And that's kind of strange for me and everybody to think about. Anything that we do in life, honestly, especially in a working environment, we need to have at least one person we know that is making decisions that are good decisions for the folks that are working underneath us. So we're seeing that there's no employee in charge. And also we're seeing things like there might be somebody out there, but it is weak, the employee in charge. Now, let me fundamentally talk about this. So when you think about a job site, typically you're going to think about a crew leader that is in charge of a group of folks that are out there. And it could be 3 folks on the job, it could be 4 or 5, whatever your company actually allows for. A lot of times that crew leader is out there and we just think they know that they're in charge of the job. So what I'm going to be talking about is not necessarily is that being activated appropriately. It actually sometimes is we give this person this responsibility, but we don't give them the skills, the knowledge, the training that they need to be able to carry out that function. The second thing that we're seeing on this employee in charge is two folks show up, especially, let's say, in a nighttime operation, where you've got to bring somebody in, and what they're doing is, I've got two journeymen that show up at the exact same time, and they're going to be working on the job site. Those two journeymen go to work. In reality, somebody out of those two have to be in charge of what's happening on that job site. And I hear a lot of folks say, well, you know, the senior person on the job site, they know they're responsible. Honestly, I'm going to tell you that what we're seeing trending is that's not actually true. That somebody takes that responsibility. They may show up at the job site and start working, and somebody may not be planning the job effectively, ensuring that they're carrying out their duties effectively. So I kind of start with that piece to get you thinking about this employee in charge. All right, so let's see what else we've got. I like to get people really involved in presentations as I go through. So I'm going to just tell you this. This is extremely important. When you think about this, just thinking about from a regulatory standpoint, from a consensus standard standpoint, just how many times this employee in charge is mentioned. That basically tells me if it's mentioned a lot of times, that means it's got to be a lot of focus placed on it. So let's start with how many times. So I'm going to ask you the question, think through this as you're seeing this presentation. Like in the OSHA final rule, and honestly, some of you may be geeks out there and you might really like to read things, and if you have, you may have read all of these pages, like 429 pages or so of the electric power standard. If you haven't, you might want to go and do that. So I'll tell you that in the 429 pages, you think, well, how many times is the employee in charge actually mentioned in that presentation? You know, 128 times. That is, to me, unbelievable that at 128 times we're going to have something mentioned about the employee in charge. That really shows that that position is such an important position. Now, let's talk about another consensus standard that our people have to deal with all the time, and that's the National Electrical Safety Code. In the National Electrical Safety Code, Part 4, which is the back portion, if you've not had a chance to look at that, that really drives a lot of what we do in our industry. In Part 4, how many times has it been mentioned? All right, so it's not a lot of pages back there, but honestly, it is mentioned at least 10 times. 10 times in just a few pages is a lot of focus. And honestly, the National Electrical Safety Code also calls it the designated person in charge of the work. So what kind of focus? There's a lot of focus just from these standards. Now, people asked all the time, well, you know, I want to know what the rules tell me. Well, I want you to think about this. You go out and you think about OSHA, consensus standards. I've given you some information here to look at, try to figure out, you know, responsibility. These standards come out and really talk about what that responsibility is for that employee in charge. Also, one of the major areas that we're seeing a lot of issues in the industry right now, and I'll tell you, over the last 5 years, our company has really seen an issue in the de-energizing lines and equipment for employee protection. I'm taking something out of service, I'm working on it in a de-energized state. That's where I'm seeing that the employee in charge plays such an important role. We've had some major incidents, fatalities that have happened because that role or that function played an important role, I think, of what actually happened out in the industry. And you can see some of the other things here. Now, what I want to do is key in on a few things that I think are extremely important for you to think about as you move through and think about these things. All right, so let's start with the National Electrical Safety Code. I love what the code says because they really key us in to very specific things to look at in the employee in charge. You can see that I have this highlighted, it's in red, it's underlined, so please look at this. The code actually keys into one person. One person shall be designated as in charge of the work to be performed. Now, I think that's something you can take home, because a lot of times where we're seeing major incident and fatalities is people have been confused when we go back and we asked in the investigative process. We find that multiple people say, well, you know, I'm not really sure who was in charge of the incident. And you might be saying, no, that's not going to happen out on the job sites. I'm telling you, it is happening. So job sites need to specifically know who that one person is that's going to call the shots. Who's going to have that responsibility at the end of the day? All right. Now, my next area is this, and it's planning. So job briefings in the world of, if you look at OSHA talks about job briefings as being, it sets the stage for what's happening in the planning world. It's all about job sites. You take the employee in charge who has the responsibility to plan the job effectively. And I'm going to just tell you, they have that responsibility once they show up at that job site to figure out what is going on, what are all the things that I'm going to be talking about here in just a few minutes, to actually put things in place to effectively run that job site. So you can see OSHA actually talks about that from an employee in charge standpoint. Now, there is another major area that is extremely important. And I mentioned this earlier. It is this de-energizing lines and equipment for employee protection. Now, a lot of us, you know, we might see that when I'm not sure exactly what that is. I want you to think about this as a lockout tagout process. It's all about lockout tagout. I take something out of service, as I mentioned earlier, and I want to work on it in a de-energized state, as close to zero energy state as I can get it. Honestly, that employee in charge plays such an important role in what we call the clearance piece of this line or this process, because they are in charge of ensuring that the employees are clearing the lines effectively for people to go in and work in this de-energized state. And honestly, everybody online might say, well, yeah, we know that. Well, why are we still losing folks in our industry because this is not being done? This is such a powerful thing. I really need for everybody to key into this. We've got to have these people out there responsible for the folks that are working out there behind these cleared lines and effectively making decisions as they are starting to bring these systems back up to ensure that the people are safe and away from the systems that are being brought back up. Unfortunately, we've seen fatalities over the last 6 months where folks have lost their lives because of this. This is just something we've got to stop. Now, I really want to make sure that you are understanding this piece. These folks that are out there as employee in charge, they don't wake up one day and just move from a line position or a substation technician position or a metering position and say, hey, now I'm in charge. This is a heavy lift. It is an extremely heavy lift. If I've got folks that are supervising or leading people effectively to perform these jobs safely, I've got people's lives out there. So it's a heavy lift. And I've got kind of a saying here. By the way, if you get a chance, in the last edition of the Incident Prevention magazine, I did write an article on this employee in charge. Go out, key into that article, and I think possibly it can tie down a few of the things that I'm talking about here. I said in that article, and I pulled it out here and put it on the screen for you, that your employee in charge plan, it has to be beyond appointing someone responsible without equipping them with skills that they're going to need for this heavy lift. All right, so that's the major thing. So what kind of skills? Well, first of all, I have to start with the responsibilities. If we lay out all the things that they have to do on a job site, then it really gives us a better understanding of how we need to look at taking these responsibilities and building skill sets around them to help these people be successful out there. So the first piece is work planning. You know, honestly, there's so many things that someone has to do in the operational side. You see the list here. I mean, they've got all the work, tasking that they've got to plan. They've got all the employees out there. They've got to make things on the fly. They've got to make decisions. They've got to do a lot of things as you go through this. So I call that operational planning. Now, honestly, when major incidents occur, a lot of times we can tie some of that down to when we look at it from operational planning was done. And that is, somebody went out, they told people where to go, you go do this work, you do this, you do this. Operational planning. Honestly, that is only one piece of this. And I think that's where we have a breakdown in the industry. There has to be this second piece added, and that is, honestly, OSHA would not be talking about it if it wasn't for this second piece. When you talk about planning in our world, it's certainly operational planning, but this piece has to be added to it. So how to take all of the things that you're planning operationally and plan them for the safety world, which in my world, I just basically say, and I say my world as a consultant, I like to make things very easy for people. You know, when you talk about safety, there are three major things. That is all about, I've got hazards out there. I have to identify what the risk is for that type of hazard. And then if my risk is extremely high, that the probability and severity of that hazard is going to take me out today, then I've got to effectively control it. That's all safety is about. So all the things that I'm doing in a planning mode, I take and I have to look at it from a safety mode. And honestly, that's a breakdown for that employee in charge when we've not equipped them to do that effectively. Now, I've got one more thing I've got to add here. You know, when we're talking about responsibility, man, we've got, at the end of the day, we want to know that, hey, that everything is wonderful out there on that job site, that everything's planned right, that everything is performed, that job, person in charge of that job, the job is performed correctly, it's performed in a timely mode, and everything is good and nothing happens. So that's what we want at the end result, but they've got to deal with these other things. And so the responsibility is, honestly, it is a massive weight lifting, bearing, or whatever you want to call it issue for these folks that are on these job sites. And so, what are some of the things that I know that they have responsibilities for? Well, let's just look at a few things in the duty side of the house. Responsibility and authority. A lot of times we give these folks the responsibility, we don't give them the authority, or we don't share how to handle the authority. All right? So, what is expected out of them? Like I say, I showed you the last slide of the things that they're actually the responsibility of what they need to be doing. So we've got to teach them effectively how to do that. We've got to empower them. And I love the word of empowerment. We've also got to ensure that they understand effective communication. When you look at where things are happening in the industry, and you go back and look at very serious injuries, fatalities, and things that we have seen in the industry, communication is probably one of the major things that's happening. So an employee in charge has to be just an awesome communicator. And communication is all about mutual understanding. Mutual understanding. That I understand what you understand and we're on the same page. Many times when all these things are happening out there and people are trying, or this employee in charge is out there trying to get these jobs up and running, they may be sending communication out that people are not understanding, and we're seeing that, where people are making decisions based on what they thought they heard or what they thought they saw. So a communication is very important. Now that third piece is planning. Somebody doesn't wake up one day, become an employee in charge and know how to plan. That is a skill, that is something that we have to teach, and we have to really teach about what we mean in the world of safety. Safety over the years in the electric power industry has been, I'm going to read that rule and you just have to follow it. I'm going to tell you that we will not keep our people safe like that. There's no way. A rule does not need to tell me how to keep myself safe. If I can identify the hazard, I understand the risk that it is to me personally, I am already going to know how to control it. By the way, that rule, I'm probably way up here beyond that rule. So it's such an important piece. But if my people that are out there in charge of those jobs don't understand that, then they are not able to plan the job effectively. They've got to have that knowledge base. And then I talk about this from a decision-making standpoint. These leaders have to be able to make decisions on the fly. And honestly, they have to be able to do this. Stop the job now. They have to make these decisions, and we have to empower them to make these decisions. This is such a strong duty that we just can't roll over. I don't know how to say it. I get really excited. You guys can tell I'm very excited about this piece of it, because there are so many folks in our world that are not making the decisions that they need to be making. And that's a lot of influences that are coming from all different directions as far as those decisions are made. But we got to get a handle on that. This is something that we can help people get better at, what our expectations are for these decisions and how to effectively make decisions, what we expect out of them in the field. Now, I'm going to kind of say this. There is, in fact, I heard a young man tell me this 2 weeks ago. He said, you know, Miss Pam, he said, I think that we are industrial athletes. And I went, yep, you're actually right. You're industrial athletes. someone that goes out and performs all these job sets. It's almost just like being an athlete. Not just like, it is an athlete. You are an athlete. I will tell you though, these people that excel, strong athletes, they don't wake up one morning, go out and be great at their job, all right? So there are so many things, conditioning, training, all the other things that come into play for them to be good at what they do. And they repeat it over and over and over again. This employee in charge, that's what we've got to see. We've got to see conditioning. We've got to see training. We've got to get these folks understanding what their job tasks are and that it is a heavy lift. We also have got to get our leadership in our organizations understanding what the folks in the field have to deal with and help them be successful. A lot of times our leaders are thinking that, hey, this is what work looks like, and it's a black straight line. When the folks get out in the field, that's work imagined. When the folks get out in the field, it's not like that. Many times it's work is up here, it's kind of a blue line, it's moving all over the place. So our folks have to have the ability to make these decisions, and we have to do this. We have to condition them. We have to give them the knowledge base, all the things that is going to make it good for them. All right? So I have a few things here that I think if you internally can do, it's really going to help increase what you've got in place. Hopefully you already have an employee in charge process in place that you are addressing that on a regular basis. I want to give you a few tools here or a few things to think about. First of all, in your organization, first thing is to acknowledge the importance of the employee in charge. It is such an important job, and you've got to acknowledge it. The second piece of this acknowledgement is if you are going to ensure success in the employee in charge world, you've got to do this. You got to involve the people that are employees in charge in helping you figure out how you're going to get better at this. So bring folks in, involve them in the decision making and the planning of what do you need and how can we help you be successful in this world? How can we help you be a better communicator? How can we help you be a better decision maker out on the jobs? And those kind of things. So we got to involve these people. Once we get that in place, then we have got to better communicate. We've got to communicate within our organizations what we expect on the jobs. When there's two people that shows up at midnight at a job together and they're both journeyman linemen, we've got to communicate that we expect one person to be in charge of that job, and that's what this looks like. We put this information out there to them, right? Then you've got to also look at it from a process of, there's got to be some training in place. And when I talk about training, I don't mean going to a safety meeting. And I don't mean giving an hour's lecture like this. So this to me is an apprenticeship process. You don't just wake up, as I keep saying, and become an employee in charge overnight. It's an apprenticeship. Just like a line worker goes through apprenticeship training, becoming the employee in charge or that leader that leads people successfully in this world, it is apprenticeship. They are constantly going to be learning and growing. And your training has to constantly learn and grow to help these people be successful. Then you've got to observe. This is where I think a lot of times in the world of safety we miss out. We put a lot of things out there. We build these slick programs. They're all so great and wonderful. And then we never look to see if it's even working, or there's challenges out in the world that they're working in. So we've got to observe to see if there are things. And then as the last piece of that, everything that you do in your world, and especially when you're connecting that second piece on that slide from an operational to a safety, is all about improvement. When we become stagnant, unfortunately, it's the perfect storm for us. So we have to constantly improve. And improvement means that you have to have a plan. Once you observe and you know that you have some weaknesses, then we build a plan to ensure that improvement happens. And it really has to be a plan based on, and I call it the SMART principles. You can look that up. If you're not familiar with it, just go out and Google and it'll give you a long list of what that looks like. But you know, you think about this, a lot of times we put plans in place, and I actually heard that earlier this week, that we have a rule over here, but we already know that it's probably not going to work. Then you don't need to have the rule. You don't need to have the plan. It needs to be something that we can achieve, something reasonable, and all the other things that go along with that. And something that we know can actually happen, or at the end of the day, that it is going to work. That's really what the SMART principles are. So I kind of say at the end of this, I'm going to challenge you. I'm going to challenge everybody online to think about this. And I've given you some questions to think through here. So I'll start out with this piece. Do all of the folks on your job sites, and I want you to be honest with yourself, do all of the folks on your job sites, no matter what type of job site you have in this world, do they know how to implement the employee in charge duties? Do they know? Do they know your expectations? Do you have expectations, and do they know them? My second thing is, how often do you review the importance of ensuring that the job site has an employee in charge? So your leadership process is constantly in the middle management process. This is where a lot of times in our industry we see there's a big disconnect in middle management. That middle manager plays a very important role in saying to these frontline leaders and the folks that are other than frontline leaders that might be in charge of these job sites how important it is and what I want to see, what my expectations are on these jobs. And then my last thing, or the last two things, what type of training are you providing? What does that look like? Is it a safety meeting? Is it an hour training? Or is it hopefully an apprenticeship process that we talked about? And the last thing here is honesty is going to be the best here. Do you feel that you have an opportunity for your team to improve in the employee in charge? And I would just basically tell you that hopefully you're answering yes, because the industry as a whole, like I say, I started out by talking about trending. The industry as a whole, I can tell you that there is large improvement that can happen here. I want to thank you today for listening, and honestly, just a little bit about us. I've been in the electric power industry personally for my whole working career, which has been 40 years. And so when you think about electric power, we were 23 years, October of this year, we have been in business. So we work all across the United States, outside of the United States, Central America, Caribbean, up in Canada. So we work all around, and it's very hard sometimes for me to talk about it, our company. But if you need any help with anything, please give us a call. We certainly appreciate it.